Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Seoyoung Kim, a professor and author of Defi for Dummies. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Rosemary.
Absolutely. So, as we know, Sam Bankman Fried's trial has started, and I kind of want to start off with what exactly happened? What led us to this point?
You know, it is very unfortunate that it coincides with crypto when this case really isn't a crypto case. It's just a simple fraud case. So the allegations right now are various types of fraud or conspiracies to commit fraud. Where the key difference here between something that would be a criminal charge versus simply a civil charge would be you made promises that you never intended to keep, right? As opposed to breach of contract, which would be that you intended to do these things, but sometimes you fail and it doesn't happen. So that would be the crux of what it is. It is a simple fraud case in terms of, did you actually intend to do the things that you claimed you would?
Okay.
And that would be where the criminal portion comes from. But now there's a whole separate civil portion as well with the bankruptcy proceedings and other civil proceedings.
So, can you provide an overview of the allegations against Sam Bankman Fried and the circumstances that led to his trial on fraud and conspiracy?
The main allegations are wire fraud, which the way that that's codified is that if you claim that you're going to do something without any intent to do it, but you use some sort of internet or telecommunication to make that claim. So it's not something that would be face to face. For example, if it were real estate development and we were local and I didn't make any misrepresentations to you through some sort of telecommunication channel, or if I simply came up to you and I said, if you give me $100, I'll give you 110 tomorrow, that would just be plain fraud. And now when you add wire fraud, it really is that you've been doing this across state lines and across international lines as well.
So, could you name all the charges that he's basically going down for?
God, I think that right now, I think there are about 6 or 7 that he's undergoing trial for right now, and they've severed some of the other charges. So the charges that were severed, to my understanding, are the conspiracy to commit fraud with respect to campaign donations. So that one's been separated, and the ones that are in play right now are the wire fraud charges. There's a securities fraud charge, and there's also a commodities fraud charge. And my guess is that with respect to also adding the commodities fraud charge is that you don't want to fall into a limbo where some of the things that are traded on FTX with crypto, you have so many different categories of what crypto can represent. And so you don't want to limit yourself to just simply securities fraud. And that's where the commodities fraud charge comes in as well. But with respect to this type of fraud, the question is, when he was accepting funds, so he has 2 separate businesses here that are under investigation. And one is FTX, which was a crypto exchange, a global crypto exchange. And then the other was his hedge fund, Alameda Research, which is in the Bay Area. So with respect to each of those, the way that they're intertwined is that, for instance, when you go on Fidelity and you transfer money into your account on Fidelity with the view that Fidelity is going to be a proper custodian of your funds, right? And so if Fidelity has taken custody of your funds, Fidelity can't view that as their own funds and commingle it with other types of expenses that they need to pay. So that would be as though if you gave me $100 to keep for you, I would be a very bad custodian if I took 10 of those dollars to pay for gas, even if I fully intended, right? Maybe I didn't have $10 right now for gas, and I know I'll get paid in 2 days. And so I know that I'll be able to top off that $100, but I am not allowed to do that. That makes me a very bad custodian. That already itself is fraud. Even if you intended to top off the account, it is considered theft and fraud because I was not supposed to commingle or even take any of that money with the intent to pay it back later. Unless, you went to the Bernie Madoff School of Ethics, in which case all of that goes.
No way. Well, that is an amazing analogy, so young. But I'm curious, you mentioned Alameda Research, and I know that his ex-girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, she was basically the CEO of that. And she's one of the key players in this Sam Bankman-Fried FTX case. I want to know more about her and other key players in this trial.
Well, I think what was happening is that, and there could very well have been a full intent to pay back FTX. It's just if we go back to this Fidelity example, right? Let's say that you transferred $1,000 into your Fidelity account, and now Fidelity is a custodian of that. But let's say Fidelity has their own hedge fund, right? And now they realize that their hedge fund is losing money. They think that the assets will recover, but until that recovery, let's say they decide to borrow some money from your account that they've taken custody of. Now, I think the analogy to be drawn there would be that with FTX, they were holding on to crypto funds. So they were a custodian of your crypto funds that they take custody of while you're trading crypto and holding it on your online wallet with FTX. Now, whether Sam Bankman-Fried, whether he actually is part of the fraud, hinges critically on whether he knew that money from FTX was being funneled over to Alameda Research to fill a gap until Alameda Research recovered, where they would have transferred the money back to FTX and hopefully no one would know. And that's where the complexities also come in terms of people have likened this to a bank run, where if you are a proper bank, people who leave their money with you, you have actually borrowed the money from them. And because of all the rules and regulations you have to follow, which are very onerous as a commercial bank, you are allowed to take those deposits. You're not just a pure custodian. You're allowed to take those deposits and invest it somewhere else, right? So if I'm a bank and you open a checking account with me, I have literally borrowed $1,000 from you, and I am indeed allowed to lend it out so people can go get a car, go get an education, go buy a home, right? Mm-hmm. Now, with FTX and Alameda, FTX is not a chartered bank. FTX, any customer deposits there are not loans to FTX that FTX was allowed to funnel and do other types of investments with. FTX was purely a custodian. And so that's where Carolyn Ellison's role lies in terms of, as a co-conspirator, can she attest to the fact that Sam Bankman-Fried knew that money was being funneled from FTX, money that did not belong to FTX? Because part of the funds do belong to FTX because they charge fees for people to trade on their platform, right? Mm-hmm. And that's quite a pretty penny with the kind of volume that they do. But aside from the money that actually belonged to FTX or actually belonged to any of the co-conspirators, if you were also taking some of the funds that were in these custodial accounts, and Sam Bankman-Fried knowingly had that shifted over to Alameda, even if he only meant for that to be temporary, that's where her testimony, I think, would be hugely valuable, and the other co-conspirators in terms of painting that picture. Did he know that that was happening?
Well, Seoyoung, does Sam Bankman-Fried even have a defense?
A lot of people have been guessing that his defense is going to be on advice of counsel. So the question there would be, did he give counsel all of the true facts? He can't omit material facts. He can't make any material omissions, and he also cannot make any material misstatements. Mm-hmm. So if without any material omissions or material misstatements, if he disclosed everything and counsel gave him the advice that he followed, then that would be one defense that he might lean on. It's not clear what other kind of defense he would have besides advice of counsel and also ignorance as to, because if there isn't actual evidence that he was the one directing those funds, and if there isn't a paper trail where he's directing people to do it on his behalf, then it could also be that he could say that he had no idea that this was going on. So it could be poor management and poor judgment, but it wouldn't be fraud outright.
So what potential outcomes or penalties could Sam Bankman-Fried be facing?
I mean, people are talking about with all of the charges that he's facing right now, and not even the ones that have been severed for next year, if he gets the maximum on everything, I think it's in excess of 100 years. But that's if he gets the maximum and if they can't be served concurrently. Because each of the wire fraud charges and the fraud charges, because he's charged with both fraud outright and he's charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. So each of those fraud charges could lead to a maximum of 20 years in federal prison. So the question is, will he get the max on, let's say he is convicted of all charges, will he get the max? And if so, will they be served concurrently, or will they have to be served consecutively? So it could be basically the rest of his natural life, depending on how much of an example people want to make here.
Do you think cryptocurrency can actually, or the crypto industry can actually come back from this? Because I feel like people were just starting to really put faith in crypto when what was it? The stable coin came down, FTX came down. I mean, they were naming arenas after crypto companies. Will it actually have a major comeback, or do people just not want to touch it or trust it anymore?
What is very exciting right now is there is a lot more litigation that's forcing issues that should have been forced far earlier in crypto. So we are getting better at defining it and treating it and regulating it appropriately. It is a setback for crypto. It's very unfortunate that what's happening is, because something bad happened that was crypto adjacent, it's not really a crypto case though, it is a simple fraud case. But because it had to do with crypto, now people are conflating fraud with crypto, when that's not the case at all. And I like to remind people, at best, these guys are bad custodians, at best. So, I mean, if you think of Quadriga, bad custodian, hundreds of millions of dollars. FTX, bad custodian, billions of dollars. But then Bernie Madoff, bad custodian, almost $70 billion. And he didn't touch crypto at all. But you can bet that if crypto existed during Bernie Madoff's time, it wouldn't have been just a simple hedge fund Ponzi scheme. It would have been a crypto Ponzi scheme. So it really isn't a crypto case at all. It really comes down to the things that make this a little more complex are, at least with Bernie Madoff, that was a simple Ponzi scheme. It was very clear he wasn't actually investing that money. He was taking money and he was hoping to fan out his network so that he could use subsequent people's money to pay off the early people and make it look as though those earlier investors had outsized returns. Now, in the case of FTX, it's not as simple as that, because there was a legitimate business of a crypto exchange, and then there was a legitimate hedge fund that was making investments. It wasn't that the hedge fund wasn't a simple Ponzi scheme in the way that Bernie Madoff ran a Ponzi scheme, but really there's still the inappropriate transfer of funds from FTX to fund and top off some of those investments of Alameda, until which point everybody hopes that they'll see a better day and that they'll be able to pay the money back before anyone notices. But I'd say that the complexities here, and I mean, Bernie Madoff, to make an example of him, I recall he was sentenced in excess of 100 years in federal prison. And all of those were consecutive years. And so this is something that's it's not quite as outsized as Bernie Madoff, but it's large enough. I mean, it's in the billions of dollars. So it could be that someone wants to make an example of him. And he is being likened so much to Bernie Madoff that doesn't do a lot of favors either in terms of what sentencing will look like.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Seoyoung.
Thanks so much, Rosemary.
All right. Have a good one.